adequate, for the interventions we're seeing. But would you say that's the trickling effect we're seeing on the Naira?
Right. I think we need to commend the Central Bank of Nigeria, especially the leadership, for a very good effort to make sure Naira got its place. You will recall that about 9 policy direction has been activated to make sure that at least this Naira really gets appreciated. And if you look at 8 weeks consecutively, we have seen those positive results. And what are those positive results? First and foremost is to look at having a good external reserve, paying backlog that has been owned by the past government and other activities around it. You could also see what happened in terms of Binance, because sometimes speculation also have its way in affecting the forex itself. I think overall we give it to them for good effort consecutively, and we think sustainability of it is just the main key, because if you are unable to sustain it, it might just be a flash in the pan, which I think they will not joke with that opportunity, and they will continue that trajectory to make sure Naira actually have its place.
And you just picked the word I was going to come up with, following what you've just said, sustainability. From Thursday, we saw 1.250, then we saw 1.245, that's the Naira. And today, when I looked up the numbers, 1.247 thereabout. Sustainability, of course, like you mentioned, is key. What are those other interventions? The Apex Bank will do its part. What should we do as a nation to keep the Naira afloat?
Right. I think we must actually work on our monetary policy and fiscal policy, so that there will not be contradiction. If monetary policy is putting up some effort to make sure things actually work out, it must also work in tandem with the fiscal policy to an extent. Because if monetary policy is making sure things are going well and is being eroded by fiscal policy, it will bring up a challenge to the Nigeria economy. So I think as it is now, we must actually make sure that the trajectory is being sustained through the monetary policy, through the fiscal policy, and also our trade policy, because that is the area we are not actually doing well in that area, because trade policy also affects this foreign forex. Because if you look at even the remittance, if you look at the diaspora remittance for about 3 weeks now, you see it's yielding positive results. So all this must come together to really support this effort that CBN is putting in place.
Now, despite this growth, I'm sure those in authority are not oblivious of the challenges, talking about the gaps. You're concerned, I'm sure you're concerned, rather, about the inflation rate. We're seeing for February 31.7% thereabout, and compared to January 29.9%. If you want to look at ways, some of these interventions can have rippling effect, for the Naira to appreciate, closing those gaps. What are the areas? Now, we've seen experts from the reports we've seen talked about infrastructure, industrialization, and the rest of it. What would be your recommendation?
Right. If you look at the approach that CBN is applying, it's much more of hawkish approach, whereby they are sacrificing economic growth for maybe stability, stability, and also making sure that inflation does not go beyond where it is. So I think the major concern should be we should also look at our NPR, because from 200 basis points to 400 basis points, we must also look at that to make sure that the manufacturing sector, the small businesses are also not affected, while we are trying to also have a stability. So these are the things that we must look at, because if you have a strong manufacturing sector, a strong MSME, you recall that also MSME employ over 85% of Nigerians, and also it's also do more than 50% to the gross domestic product of the country. That simply means that we must also look at our NPR. Is either we maintain status quo going forward, or we just make sure that we balance it so as not to bring a negative effect in the long run.
And if we want to talk going forward, importation is what will I call it now, keeps rearing its head when we're supposed to be thinking of export. Although there are efforts, in place, but how do we boost these revenues by promoting more exports for the country?
Right. Most of the effort that CBN is putting in place, they are much more of a short and medium term. To have a long-term support, that's where we must also look at our export very, very, because if you can export, it also gives you that opportunity to have a remittance that will compete and give Naira the right place to be. So I think we must look at that. And structurally also, we must also look at our security. It's also what we need to watch very well, because if you look at our major problem, and most of